Welcome everybody to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Today our talk is about the Gospel of Mark. We continue a series of discussions. This is part 12. So now we get to some special scenarios with Mar Yeshua in it, the Master Jesus. So Yeshua begins doing more than just miraculous healings. He does more than just exorcisms, but now at this point in chapter 6 of Mark, we see Jesus doing other miracles, which is to show his oneness and consciousness with God, that he shares in the Malkuth of God, the rulership of God, the power of God. So these miracles may have been demonstrated to show what one can do when they become spiritually rebirthed, when they become a Baranash, a son of man. And the full name of that title, as we know from coming to classes and to church, is the Son of Mankind Collective Messiah. We're all born in the first Adam, the first humanity, which is marked with, let's say, to be diplomatic, it's more about taking care of myself than worrying about others. The second Adam is about taking care of others first, and then, once everybody else is comfortable, seeing to your own needs. So the second Adam, or the second humanity, which is the Baranash, the communion of saints, the Son of Mankind Collective Messiah, these are all synonymous terms. When you become part of that, you become spiritualized, you become illumined, you become perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And you are able to show and demonstrate that you share the Malkuth of God. You share in the sovereignty of the Lord, even when embodied in a human form. So here in Mark chapter 6, verses 41 through 44, we see Jesus multiplies the bread and fish. He does a miracle, a miraculous thing. So the scene is, just before this in the Gospel of Mark, I'm getting right to the point here, but to set the scene, hundreds, thousands of people are coming to listen to him. They're coming to him to be exorcised. They're coming to him to be healed. So many people are just trying to touch his garment so that they can become healed through faith and fidelity with the Mar Yeshua. So night was falling, and the disciples of Jesus said, you know, it's getting late. You need to rest. Let's go. And Jesus said, no. It's nighttime. All these people that have come to see me, they haven't eaten. It's nighttime. They're going to travel a far way to go home. Will they have the energy to even get home? So he said, we need to feed these people. And there were thousands and thousands of people there. 5,000 men, to be exact, according to Mark 6:44. So Jesus asks them what food they have available to feed these people with. And they respond that they had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish for 5,000 people. So Jesus says, okay, bring those loaves of bread and fish to me, please. And then we come to the Gospel of Mark scene here. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he, Jesus, looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. A lot of people today, and we live in a time of rationalism and a lack of faith at this point in the world. And I do think that we should question things. Is this meant to be taken literally? Is this meant to be taken allegorically? What is it? About 20 years ago, I might have thought that this was just an allegory, or that it was just made up. But then I met a real spiritual master. So I have a living spiritual master, as well as my heavenly master, Mor Yeshua. So long before I met my spiritual master, but in the presence of people I know that were first-hand observers, my spiritual master was in a crowd in India, and she had been exhibiting different divine states, different states of being that weren't normal, to put it simply, for this conversation. And the people of that time didn't understand that her consciousness was one with universal consciousness or God consciousness. They thought by these signs that she was showing and veritable miracles that she was showing that she was God. So there is some confusion, and I think people have that same confusion or had that same confusion about Jesus. We're all God. We're all parts of God's one body. But there is no only Son of God. There's not. Jesus' title was Son of God, meaning a great saint, a great righteous Sadiq of God, a perfected saint whose individual consciousness was at one with God consciousness. And through that unity of consciousness, great saints are able to do great things. But anyhow, back in those days, which was probably in the 70s, maybe early 80s, far before I met my beloved master, the crowd was heckling her, saying, you know, if you're God, or if you're one with so-and-so, show us a miracle. And Amma said that she would not show any miracles. That's the name of my teacher, Amma, which means mother. But they kept on persuading her and persuading her and pushing her and pushing her. And the crowd was getting a little bit rowdy because there were some even violent people in the crowd that were trying to test her spiritually. And at some point, somebody gave her an urn of water or a big vase of water to say, it's called a kalash, which is like a pot. And it was filled with water. And so my teacher went into a divine mood and she dipped her finger into the water and chanted some sort of prayer, said some sort of prayer, and it became milk. So this little pot of water was traveling throughout the whole crowd and everybody was taking the blessed food. They were drinking the milk. And when it came back to my teacher and a person that was next to her observing it, there was still some milk left in the urn after feeding an amazing amount of people. And at that point, she dipped her finger into the milk again, turned her finger around inside the milk, said a few prayers, and it became a special kind of sweet pudding that again was passed around the crowd. And this little pot of sweet pudding fed a lot more people than it should have. And when it came back to her, there was still a little bit left. So, had I not heard the story about my living master from reputable people that witnessed it with their own eyes, I probably wouldn't have believed this story about Jesus either. I probably would have come up with some kind of mental excuse or reasoning, or that this was an allegory, or that it was just made up. But no. True masters, true saints of the community of saints that share the sovereignty, the power of God, of which there are some alive today on this planet. They can do such miracles like multiplying food into greater quantities to feed and bless those that come to be blessed by them. So it is my assertion that this is definitely possible, since I know of a very special woman that demonstrated such a skill herself in relatively modern times. Again, this would have been in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I forget the exact date. But it can and does still happen. So next, Jesus walks on water. And Mark makes it apparent that the walking on water miracle was for those that thought that the multiplication of loaves and fish was, they didn't understand. Either they didn't believe that it had happened, maybe it was some kind of mass hypnotism, or they just didn't understand why that happened. And again, the why of the multiplication of loaves and fish is because Jesus shares in the Malkuth of God. He shares the co-sovereignty of power with God on earth. And we can all attain co-sovereignty with God. But we have to purify ourselves first. We have to make ourselves worthy to be reborn into the second Adam, the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah. So for those that didn't quite get this, that Jesus shared the power of God because he was a purified, righteous saint of Israel, he did this feat. Mark 6:47-52. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. When he, Jesus, saw that they, his disciples, were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. They thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So Jesus did this miracle. No doubt he did it to save his disciples, right? And we talked about earlier, there was an earlier episode in Mark where they were all in a boat and the boat was going to capsize, and Jesus commanded the elements, the wind and the sea, to calm down, and it did. Thus, Jesus showing that he had power over the elements, over the ocean itself. And this is very similar. Maybe it was the same story, maybe it was a second occasion, who knows? But Jesus could have very easily, from the shore, just said, "Oh God, whom I share co-sovereignty with, please calm the sea so my disciples are safe." But no, Jesus didn't do that. He walked on the water, on a raging sea, toward the boat of his disciples, and they thought he was a ghost, because this is a man walking on water. An amazing feat. Again, this is a demonstration. Why did he do this? To show that he shared in the sovereignty of God. That I am a son of God, a perfected saint of the Kima, of the resurrection. I am the firstborn of the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah. And when you share in God's power, you have power over all of creation too. So Jesus was demonstrating in a very big way that he has control over all the elements. So again, this is a demonstration, just like exorcism was, and physical healing was, and multiplication of the bread and the fish was. It was to demonstrate to people that it is possible for a person to sanctify and purify him or herself to the point of becoming a perfected saint. And when you become a perfected saint, you are spiritually reborn into the communion of saints, into the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, the Baranash. And when you are part of the Baranash, you share in the power, the sovereignty, the rulership of God over all creation. They, whoever they was, we presume it's his disciples, They were just astounded. They were shocked. They'd never seen anything like this. I mean, have you? Because they didn't understand the meaning of the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Hearts being hardened means that you aren't receptive to the spiritual truth at hand. You don't get it. Because remember, the heart, the lebab, is the seat of the mind. So basically, their minds were closed, or they just weren't getting it. And all the time through the Gospel of Mark, we see people, especially Jesus' closest disciples, just not understanding him. They didn't understand the parables. Jesus had to explain it to them. They didn't understand many teachings he said throughout Mark, as we have seen and will see. So apparently the message is that they didn't understand that Jesus shared the power of God when they saw the loaves. I mean, duh. So this walking on water apparently was meant to shock them. And in seeing that, there's this man is a man of God. He is a saint of God. And we should listen to him. And that's the implication of both of these miracles found in Mark chapter 6. So Jesus taught that inner purity is much more important than outer purity. In Mark 7:5-7, it says, "The Pharisees and the scribes asked him, Jesus, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines.' You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." So what's going on here? The Pharisees and scribes, they were witnessing Jesus' disciples not washing their hands before they ate. So this was considered very uncouth. As you can see here to the left, there's a special sacred water pot that you wash your hands with, and there are many kinds of ablutions or water lustrations that were used in Jewish culture before worship. And Jesus' disciples didn't wash their hands before they ate or before they worshipped. And the Pharisees said, "Oh, no. We wash our hands before we eat. And this is a purification that's necessary before you eat." And Jesus, who is very familiar with and takes a lot of his teachings from Isaiah, or some of his teachings are based in Isaiah prophecy and teaching, he quotes him and says, "This people, you Pharisees, honor God with your lips, but your hearts are far away from him. You don't worship God. You teach human precepts." In other words, all these outer purity rituals, these washings, God never asked for that. God wants us to make a sacrifice of our heart, to give our hearts to God, to give our hearts to other people that suffer around us. That's what God wants. And this is what Jesus said. It's much better to purify your mind and your heart from negative thoughts, words, deeds, habits, reactions. It's much more important to spiritualize the mind and the heart than it is to wash the outside of our bodies. And Jesus wasn't saying that you shouldn't do water lustrations. He was saying that what is more important is inner purity. So the crux of this teaching is that, if you're not paying any attention to your own inner purity, the purification of your heart and your consciousness, then there's really no point in doing those outer rituals that are just for show. That's the teaching of Jesus. And finally, in the same line, Mark 7:14 through 15, then he, Jesus, called the crowd again and said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand, there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. So Jesus is saying there's nothing that can come into a person that can make them impure. So he's actually speaking against different rules of food, different kosher laws developed by the various rabbis, pre-rabbinical ravs of Jesus' time. He's saying that, there's nothing that you could eat that could really defile you. But the things that come out of your mouth are what defile. So angry words, lustful words, jealous words, any negative words that are used to bring other people down, gossip, slander, these types of things are what really defile us. Because Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all of your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So we should be treating, who's our neighbor? Everyone. Everyone's our neighbor. To love your neighbor as yourself means to see them as the same as you, to understand your inherent oneness with everyone. So you defile yourself when you yell at other beings that are part of the one humanity. If your goal is to become more spiritual, then we have to watch every word that comes out of our mouth. And really to do that, you have to practice meditating or taking a vow of silence. It's an excellent thing to do once per week, to sit in silence for 1, 2, or 3 hours. And you can also move around, make lunch, or take the dog for a walk. But the idea is that you're totally in silence and you're witnessing or watching the mind. And then you start to see things come up in your mind, angry thoughts, jealous thoughts, worries, grief. All these things, these negative emotions and thoughts and habits, memories within the mind, if we don't recognize them, we start to spew them out of our mouths. And when a thought becomes a word that somehow strikes, attacks, or brings down another person, then that defiles you greatly. In other places, Jesus says that those who speak angrily to their brother or sister are deserving of purification in Gehenna, and that they should put down their offering to God before the altar, go make it right with your brother or sister before you come back and worship. So Jesus' opinion was that you should have a certain amount of mental and emotional purity before you come to the altar to worship. So we should always understand, we think about, this diet will be more healthy, or this one will be more spiritual, I should be vegetarian, I should be vegan, I should be this, I should be that. Jesus doesn't say that. Although there are historical references that some table seders, sacred meals that Jesus would have done with his disciples, they were practiced with vegetarianism by some. We can see obviously that Jesus ate fish. It's only natural. I mean, the main job around the area where Jesus lived was being a fisherman. All of Jesus' main apostles were fishermen. So they ate fish, they ate meat. Here, though, it's not even really about meat or vegetarianism. I'm bringing that into the mix simply because a lot of people do take a vegetarian diet to express a certain spiritual idea. And there's nothing wrong with that. But Jesus is saying that that really won't do much to purify you if your thoughts, your words, and your actions are still, kind of crappy. So we have to focus on what's coming out of our mouths. What are the words we're speaking? And the only way that we can really catch on to our words is by watching our mind. Attaining more silence in our days through meditation and prayer and contemplation. And seeing what arises in our mind. Every night we should sit in contemplation. Sit like you're going to meditate and say to God, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, my beloved Abba, please come and help me reflect on the day. Let me see the good things I've done, and let me see those things I need to improve. And then sit in silence and let things arise. Go over your day from the time you woke up until the time you sat down for contemplation right before bed. And when you start to see negative things come up, how you didn't handle that situation quite well, how you snapped at that person, how you put on a good outer show in that conversation, but the thoughts you were thinking behind the scenes, if only they knew, these are the things you mentally note. Just by gently and compassionately observing your day, doing an internal check-in once a day, you can really start to identify certain habits and speech and action that are not becoming of a disciple of Mar Yeshua. And just by recognizing that, bringing it to the forefront of the mind, a truly spiritual person will do less of that or stop it altogether. Sometimes certain habits need a little bit longer to starve out. But always remember, whatever we do on the outside, whatever rituals we do on the outside, they're good. But what is more important is our inner world, purifying the mind, purifying the heart, purifying our speech, purifying our actions. A true disciple of Jesus will speak only wholesome, uplifting words. This is where we'll end for this week. Let's continue with the Liturgy of the Chalice. Thank you so much.